Hi, I'm David Jablonski of the Dayton Daily News, the Dayton Flyers beat writer for the last 12 seasons. I'm also Chase's dad, who he's watching at home. And if I didn't mention him early, he would not be able to tune in for much longer. But we are here at Wing Springboro to talk Flyer basketball. We're enjoying some Flylight Lager, too, the beer that supports UD athletes. Every purchase, a portion of those proceeds go to Dayton basketball. That's part of the new NIL era. That's the way it works these days, and I think the Dayton basketball players appreciate every beer we're having tonight. So we're trying something new tonight with this live event on YouTube for the Flyer fans. It was supposed to be more of a celebration when we planned it. Of course, the Flyers are struggling in their last two games, but it's a long season, and I wouldn't be surprised if they bounce back with two home wins this week. But joining me are Jeremy Kelley, Dayton Daily News, fellow sports writer Marcus Hartman. Guys, tell me a little about yourself. Jeremy is a huge UD fan going way back to the not-so-glory years.
Yeah, the not-so-glory years is right. No, I'm the assistant news editor of the Dayton Daily News, but a career started 15 years on the sports desk. I was the guy, at 10 o'clock at night taking Bucky Alber's game story from UD or Arch's column or Gary Noon's column and putting the sports section to bed. It was a great start to my career. I was also a UD student, going back even further than that. And like you said, yeah, that was not a pretty time. 93, 94, we were 4-26 and 6-21. I can tell ugly stories about that time, but let's not do that.
No, let's not focus on those years. Dayton fans do not want to hear about that. They've heard enough. Marcus, you and I are kind of too young to know those years well. Of course, I know
thanks,
them well.
Dave. Thanks.
We were around. I was in high school, but I was rooting for a winning program, Cincinnati. Marcus, what's your background with UD? We've covered some games together at the arena.
We have. Well, it was funny you mentioned Gary Noon. I think there are still Gary Noon columns cut out and taped to my wall in my bedroom at home.
Cool.
And
R.I.P.
And so that was, I always enjoyed his stuff. The funny thing is, I was growing up cheering for Ohio State. I remember one of my first UD memories was when WHIO would have the games, and I didn't understand why they would be on instead of Ohio State. So when I was like 5, I'd be like, "What is this?" And I would be annoyed with it. And now I look up those cool old intros, that they had from the 80s. I looked one up the other day, and it's like, wow, this is like the sweetest thing ever.
Do you mean watch out, watch out, watch out? Yeah. Here come the Flyers.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Marcus is from Cedarville, which is very similar to Fayetteville, where I went to high school. So we were both similar in that regard.
When I always loved UD Arena, because when I tell people, I think my senior year or maybe a year after was the last time was when they quit playing every high school tournament game at UD Arena. So even if you were in Division 4 and 0-20, you got to play one game at UD Arena. So we got to go there every year. I mean, we were usually better than 0-20.
I played a little pickup basketball there. I'd really like to play some more there someday because it's an amazing place. That's why I wrote a book about the arena, and hopefully there'll be some more games there soon, including this week. Dayton plays George Mason tomorrow at 7 p.m. at UD Arena. They play Loyola at 4 p.m. Saturday. As I mentioned, the Flyers lost their last two last week, George Washington, then UMass. Two of their what should have been the easier road games of the season, they fall, so they're going to have to make up some ground with some tougher road games down the stretch. A lot of things went wrong in those two games on both sides of the court. They fell behind in the GW game and tried to make a big comeback, as they've done many times in the past, and did make a big comeback. Cut it to 3, had a chance, or cut it to 1, had a chance to, or cut it to 3, had a chance to cut it to 1. A couple times and couldn't get any closer, and then it just became a blowout at the end. GW couldn't miss from three-point range against UMass. It was a different problem. UMass made almost all their free throws. That was one of the reasons they beat Dayton. Dayton made a good percentage of their free throws, but not nearly enough. It was a free throw parade type of game. I spent a lot of time waiting for players and coaches after both those games, just standing there waiting for interviews. I think they're looking for answers, and they've had a week to stew on them, so they've had time to at least find those answers. But it's not easy to figure it out what has gone wrong. I think Flyer fans are asking all the same questions Anthony Grant is asking. Some guys who were such consistent scorers in November when they beat UConn, December, when the season peaked with the victory against Marquette. A lot of guys just can't get shots to fall, and I think it's affecting them on the defensive end right now. Anthony Grant said as much after the game the other day. And when the shots aren't falling, it's going to affect you in a lot of different ways, and we're seeing that right now. Jeremy, did you watch both of those games?
I did, and you're coming off a year where you had the number one three-point shooter in the country in Kobe Brea. You had Nate Santos hitting 40-some%, other guys shooting well. UD's last 6 games from 3-point, 21%, 24%, 28%, 28%, 26%, 25%. That's not going to win a whole lot of games unless you've got a Deron Holmes or an Obi Toppin in the post, which they don't. So they've got to figure out a way to get the offense going. I'm a huge fan of inside-out basketball. Throw it to Zed, let him kick it out, make the defense turn their heads. But we'll see, Anthony Grant's offenses have generally been really efficient offenses. So we'll see how they get that turned around.
Yeah, I mean, I think Enoch Cheeks is we had a question about from one of the fans here, what happened to Enoch. I mean, he was a great glue guy last year. Didn't have to put up big numbers. They had Deron Holmes last year. They had Kobe Brea, as you mentioned, the nation's 3-point shooter. Played his role perfectly last season, but this season they needed more out of him, and they got it in Maui. He was really the star of that UConn game. Had a bunch of baskets in the game-ending run. Somehow they beat UConn by 18, and UConn has gone back to being the great team everybody thought it would be since losing 3 games in Maui. But he has really struggled. You got to think he's going to put it together. Everybody goes through slumps. Everybody goes through ups and downs. It's a long season. I am sure he is taking these missed shots as hard as anyone. I know Flyer fans are disappointed and frustrated, but I think you gotta stick with this group and hope they can get back to the winning ways here soon. Playing at home is pretty much the key right now. They've won 26 in a row there. It's been almost 2 years since they lost. The last team to beat them was George Mason, who plays at UD Arena tomorrow.
Well, one of the fans who was here tonight talking about Enoch Cheeks was saying, where's the offense coming? It looks like a confidence issue.
Yeah.
If you watch the last game, there was he took a good in rhythm 3. It didn't fall. 2 possessions later, he gets the same pass, and you could just see the look on his face, and he kicked it right back out. And this team cannot go where it needs to go without him playing well. He needs to keep shooting the ball.
Yep.
I'm sure all of his teammates are on him. Keep shooting, be the guy we know you are.
A couple shots might turn things around for him. Marcus, you know a team well that was playing not so great a month ago or 6 weeks ago, whatever it is now, and now is on top of the world. Things can change fast. I'm not saying the Dayton Flyers basketball team is the Ohio State football team, but we've seen many teams go through this and get it back on track pretty quickly. Are there any parallels we can draw?
Well, I mean, it's good to have good players. That's the
That's
number
the key.
one thing. If you have talented players, then that means that you don't have to do anything they're not capable of doing to turn it around. So now you've seen that they've got the talent. So, and like you guys said, basketball seasons are very long.
Yeah.
It's good that they did not have a slow start like the Bengals. They were able to build up that resume. So you'd almost rather have these 2 bad losses than you don't want to trade those for the really good wins they've already got, right? So there's still plenty of time for them to turn it around. They've really just kind of eliminated their margin for error, which is, I guess, also where Ohio State football was. They didn't have any more games, but they did have that one game they could afford to lose. You don't want it to be the Michigan game, but that's what it's all about. And now college football is in the same realm where you start over again when you get into the postseason. So I know that's the number one goal for the Flyers every year. I know there's a conference tournament drought going there, but
drought is a nice
getting
word.
into the NCAA tournament is the goal, and then you can prove what you can do. So it is interesting. You're just seeing how not only how a team can look different once those other bright lights go on, but how it can energize a fan base too.
Yeah. Let's go back. We talked a little bit about Maui, but they really delivered the best 7th place performance in the history of that tournament, I'm sure. Yes, because they lost the first 2 games, and North Carolina hasn't turned out to be the team everybody thought it was going to be. But Iowa State, on the other hand, is just as good.
Fantastic.
Has been just as good the rest of the season as they were in Maui. And Dayton, had a chance to win that game in the last seconds. Did they surprise you? Did you have any expectations coming into the season?
I had expectations, and I guess I would say I wasn't shocked solely because of UD's history in these kind of tournaments. The fans travel. It feels more like a home game than a neutral game, and we generally do well. So I wouldn't say I came in with no expectations. I knew who we were playing, so I wasn't like, hey, we're going to win this tournament. But then they go out in the first half, and they're up, 20 on North Carolina,
Right.
and it's like, holy cow, what do we got here? But no, I mean, that was 3 – with the exception of the second half against North Carolina, that was 3 great games, and it set up the expectations. I don't know if Marcus wants to compare the expectations that Ohio State football fans have to the expectations UD basketball fans have. Sometimes there's a there's a little I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's fun following. I think that following UD basketball games on Twitter. I'm never going to call it X. On Twitter during it's a very, very similar experience to following Ohio State football games in terms of the fans know everything, and usually it's bad. If you're not actually following the game, a lot of times you'll be kind of surprised to look up and say, "Oh, they won by 20. I thought they were going to lose by like 45," based on the way that based on the mood of everything. But also they're fans who they deserve to have high expectations. They're programs with a lot of winning history, and not that they are like Alabama football that are going to win it every year. Where nobody really does that. But it's fun. It's good to have high expectations. I mean, even Ryan Day has said that over and over again for whatever pressure he's been under. I just think that that's an interesting thing. And I think that there are probably a lot of people who are UD basketball and Ohio State football fans. So maybe there's something to that as well, just from, kind of approaching sports with that seriousness that can be a double-edged sword, but I think is more good than bad.
What's that phrase in Columbus? Pressure is a privilege.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's like John Cooper said, the fans are with you, win or tie, and don't tie many. So now you can't tie them. So
I didn't know what to expect from this team, and I talked to every single one of these guys last summer. Talked to the new recruits when they came in. Talked to Anthony Grant a couple times. As much as I knew about the Flyers, you're kind of throwing everything up in the air and trying to get them to mesh in this new era where you're reshaping the roster every year. They lost Ron Holmes to the NBA, Kobe Brea, Kobe Elvis to the transfer portal. Added some promising pieces, but how are these guys all going to mix? Are they going to be able to play well together? Some guys are in new roles, as we mentioned. Enoch Cheeks, Malachi Smith was a big question mark coming back off his missed season with the knee injury, and really, the ankle surgeries before that. So there were a lot of question marks, and they certainly surpassed my expectations with their performance in non-conference play. You starting with the win against Northwestern, set a tone there with the comeback in the second half, which we've seen many times since, and then going to Maui. My whole expectation was if they can win one game, it's a success, because it was one of the great Maui fields of all time. And even though they lost those two games, they showed what they can do, and they didn't have a lot to hang their heads about. But to beat UConn, they really put the season on a new path. That's their biggest upset since beating number 2 Notre Dame in 1974, and it's looking more like a big upset every day as UConn keeps winning. So. That was big. Then the Marquette game. I mean, all of a sudden they were almost assuredly in the NCAA tournament, as long as they didn't hit all these landmines in the A-10, which was a big question mark, because we know how tough these road games are. Anybody can beat anybody, and we've seen it in the first 2 games. So
as long as sports didn't happen, and sports happened.
So I understand Dayton fans' expectations. They want to compete for championships and get to the tournament every year. I think the realistic expectation is 3A or 4 NCAA tournament berths every 10 years.
Ooh, I'm going a little higher than that.
Yeah, well, you're a fan.
Exactly.
So I've got more realistic expectations. We're also Reds fans too.
Yeah, that's true.
We would take like one World Series every 50 years. Would that be good enough for you at this point?
34 years ago.
I know, but they're on pace for probably one every 50 at this point. Bengals, we'll take one Super Bowl in our lifetime. So I understand the Flyer fans' disappointment. I also don't think I think the guy who emailed me earlier this week saying they should have fired Anthony Grant after last season when they made the NCAA tournament, canceled his season tickets after they made the NCAA tournament. That's an extreme I can't really get on board with. But as I told him, nobody likes their coach. Whether you're a Bengals fan with Zach Taylor, Reds fan with David Bell, Ohio State fans hated Ryan Day in November. I don't know many fans who like their coach.
Hey, you guys have young kids. You'll get to be the coach sometime in a couple of years.
Maybe,
People won't like you either.
I'm a coach. I'm not a coach of the sports team right now, but I'm a coach of the toy team at home.
Nice.
So,
nice.
Tell me what fan base right now likes their coach.
No, I mean, the fan base is about to not like their coach. I mean, even, Urban Meyer, everybody, there were plenty of people grousing about him towards the end. Same thing with Jim Tressel. You're gonna have that as unless you're Nick Saban, that it's gonna be the people are gonna kind of fall out of favor with you. So like you say, one thing that I think is funny is sometimes fans' complaints are not correct, But I do think some of the things that kind of rub fans the wrong way about Anthony Grant, I think Anthony Grant's done a great job. I think he's bringing in the guys to win with, which is the number one thing that you've got to do.
Yeah.
If you don't have the players, you don't have much. It's a nice story to coach them up and, get the most out of guys, but you need to have NBA type guy, or you know what I mean, guys with some NBA potential. So you got that, which raises the expectations, and then you've got to coach them. So there's a lot of, but it is kind of funny because I do get the sense, the complaints about, the offense and, some of the end of game stuff that is actually, a legitimate frustration. So I can understand where fans are coming from for that standpoint. So that's another thing that I think is interesting. In that sometimes fans are just completely off on things and they're unrealistic. But I think a lot of people, some of the things they'd like to see, it's good, but it could be better, right? I think that those people are not out of line to have those expectations.
It always could be better, but it probably never will be. Anthony's had some great highs and some big lows. The last two losses, adding to the list of some games Dayton should have won over the years. But I've had some bigger upsets here than they had in the Archie Miller years too, and that 2020 season, of course, will be long remembered. More for the ending than anything else. But
the banner hanging right there. What does it say? Dayton Flyers.
You can't see the banner, but it says 2020 national champions, probably.
Yes.
I would put
I like it.
Perhaps.
Hey, come on.
Probably is a little too strong for me.
You can see which end of the table is tipped to the fan side.
I think it's fair for a fan. I think that's it's close enough.
Yeah.
You can round up if you're a fan.
I would agree.
But it's not going too high.
Yeah.
National champions, 5% chance maybe. I don't know. But
Oh,
nobody
man.
was a big favorite
I
going
mean,
into that tournament.
They would have it was them in Kansas, right? Who they played like a 1-point game against Kansas. If I
Yeah.
remember.
I told him he should have got an A10 tournament banner because that would be that's just as hard for Dayton to win a A10 tournament.
I was just going to say, which do you expect least?
Yeah, right. I don't know.
They got to put it back at UD Arena.
If you're in the A10, we've talked about this online before. You cannot win a national championship. It's actually impossible because it hasn't been done. No power team outside the power conference has ever won a national championship in basketball, at least in the modern era.
Somebody got to do it.
Unless you go back to LaSalle in the pre-conference days. Somebody's got to do it, right? Dayton certainly has the resources to be that program, but Gonzaga hasn't done it, and they've had many cracks at it.
And they had lottery picks on their team.
Yeah, the key to winning a national championship, which, as I said, will never happen for Dayton, sorry fans, is getting to the NCAA tournament every year and making runs every year. And maybe one of those years you break through.
Well, that team had, the pieces to make the Final Four, at least on paper. It's obviously if you're a number one seed, you should make the final. But, they have an NBA player. They had some shooting, and they had the point guard. That guy can be underappreciated sometimes with a guy who could really carry a team, even if they don't have an Obi Toppin, but that's still, going to really raise the profile of a team when you've got that veteran point guard.
Well, that was also a team that beat Duquesne by 4
right.
in the regular season. So it was a team that could have lost in the first round. I would have said they would have most likely breezed to the Sweet 16. But after that, it's just kind of a toss-up. Who knows what happens in the NCAA tournament.
So, we talked a minute ago about Enoch Cheeks and maybe is there a confidence issue. I think winning is about confidence. And that team had that confidence.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Jimmy's and Joe's more than X's and O's. You're right. But there are certain teams that have or develop kind of that innate confidence where not we can win, but we're going to win.
Yeah.
Hey, we're down 6 with 3 minutes to go. That's all right. We're going to win, and that team had that. It's really hard to develop because how do you do it if you haven't done it kind of thing? But if you could bottle that, let me know.
Yeah, but they had guys slumping that year. Ryan Mixell struggled from 3-point range all season. But they were so good that they were able to overcome any slumps.
Yeah.
Warped wing. He was
Warped
another,
wing. Have a drink. Don't spill it on your microphone,
he was another guy. That team had the right kind of glue guys type of guys too, right? And they had Trey Landers, right? He was another one of those. So, that was – that was a team, if you were going to draw it up, especially to be a non-power conference team that would make a run, winning the national championship, it's 2 more games than making the Final Four. But you talk about you've got an NBA player and you've got the right kind of complementary pieces, and you got that point guard who can kind of go out there and win some games for you himself also, from that standpoint. That was the amazing thing about that season.
I'm going to steer us back to the current season. The Flyers are 1-2 in the A10 right now. They've got 15 more games, so they're a long way from being out of it. They just dug themselves a hole with these 2 losses in games they should have won, at least won one of them maybe. Got George Mason tomorrow. That's not an easy game. George Mason comes in playing well. Loyola Chicago not playing quite as well. And the fact that these games are at home means Dayton should win. They've won 26 in a row at home, as I mentioned. One more, and they will tie the second longest home winning streak in school history. They need to get to 30 to tie the record. They could potentially, if they keep winning at home, break the school record for home wins against VCU, which will be a tough game, on February 7th. So that's a long way from now.
What year was the 30 streak?
I have to go back. It's
but like back in
early
the
2000s.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I've been writing it down and copying and pasting so much that I forget the exact years. But they got to protect the home court. If they can go 9 at home, 0 at home, they will make their lives much easier.
Yeah.
But you need to win at least half of those road games.
Well, I mean, UD's last 2 seasons, their A10 road record's 5-4.
Yeah. Exactly.
So last year was a team, not quite Sweet 16, but a solid NCAA tournament team. They lost 4, A10 road games. That's gonna happen. They play George Mason tomorrow. George Mason is playing well, but they're 3 A10 wins at home. They're 1 A10 loss on the road. They're coming here.
The magic number, all the A10 regular season champions in recent years have lost just 2 road games.
Yeah.
So Dayton may not win the regular season championship already, just because they have so many tough road games ahead. But as far as their NCAA tournament hopes, I think if they can keep their A10 losses to 4 or 5, they're still going to be in contention.
There's been plenty of 14-4 years.
Yeah, they were 14-4 in the A10 last year with their non-conference performance victories against St. John's and Cincinnati and LSU.
Yep.
That got them into the tournament, and they've got better wins this year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they didn't have the 2 losses they have last year. So they have a lot of work to do to get to the NCAA tournament, but they're far from out of it with 15 games left. And you always got the hope of the conference tournament, right?
Yeah.
You can always get in.
Yeah,
that's why I love college basketball.
Right?
Huh?
They're due for the conference.
They are
tournament,
definitely.
They're more than due.
Yeah, so it's in Washington D.C. this year. Dayton fans don't like to hear the fact that they have never won that tournament outside their own arena, and have not won it since 2003. But if any program is due, it is Dayton. But I don't know. It should be an interesting season. We'll know a lot about how this team responds this week. They can get things back on track, or they're going to start feeling good. But then eventually they're going to have to prove they can win on the road. They have not won a true road game this year because they didn't have any in non-conference play. They're 0-2 in true road games. So people were speculating whether that was a cause of their struggles in the first 2 road games. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so, because I've seen them lose at GW many times when they've had plenty of opportunities on the road before. And I've seen them lose at UMass, even though they haven't lost there in a while. I've seen them lose plenty of games there with having been battle tested on the road. So I don't think it really mattered, but it's another thing to speculate
Stop
about.
me from going on my long riff about how college basketball is unfair, towards smaller conferences here. But going on the road is hard for everybody.
Yeah.
Tennessee was 15-0, and they went to Florida
right.
and they got the hell beat out of them.
Yep.
They lost by 30. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams struggling on the road.
Kansas is 2-2 on the road. Yep. Marquette, they've lost 2 on the road. Did they lose one? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Kentucky's lost 2 on the road.
I think Dayton would have preferred to start that Marquette series on the road this year.
Yeah.
But they weren't going to turn down Marquette just to play it on the road. Marquette wanted to start on the road, so they played it here, and that's how that happened. Speaking of big picture NCAA stuff, we got a huge change coming in NCAA later this year, July 1st, I believe. Schools will be able to start paying athletes directly. How big of a change is this? Will fans notice? What do you think?
Well, I don't know if it's as big a change from right now as it would have been from 5 years ago. If they jumped right in, people have kind of already gotten used to learning about these guys having salaries, or sometimes that are more hypothetical than others, and the players making money and being able to afford nice cars and things like that. Yeah. So it'd be a little bit less of a shock to the system. Obviously, it's going to be a big deal. The idea is that it's supposed to be more of a leveling of the playing field, kind of, if they put sort of a cap on how some of the big schools can spend. So we'll see how it works out. But there'll still be some room for schools that have a good outside collective to be able to pay on top of what these kind of more or less salaries are going to be from schools. But, I look at it as I think it's a fascinating thing that, whether you're talking about football or basketball, that sometimes the schools that are in the big cities, I think maybe are a little bit more of an advantage than some of the other schools because they're just maybe more businesses and more opportunities to raise some money. And historically, especially in college football, a lot of the powers are not in big cities.
Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of it can be a little bit of a field there. And Dayton, I think, is an interesting market in terms of obviously you've got a lot of affluent fans and a lot of hardcore fans, and then it's Dayton is a bigger city outside. Once you get outside of the big cities, Dayton is right there with a lot of other cities. So it'll be very interesting to see how it shakes out for Dayton. And I think another thing that we have learned is in the current era of NIL, one big donor can make a difference anywhere, even at like Michigan or somewhere where you have one guy to kind of. It's almost better that way because it's a little easier to direct the money at the right place. And so Dayton, maybe that's another thing. If Dayton can kind of find its large donor or two who is really interested in kind of getting them over the finish line on some of these things, that could be a big deal. And I think a big thing is talent retention as well. Whether it's a borderline pro guy, a lot of those guys are now going to be staying in school because they can make as much or more money without going overseas or whatever. And obviously you've seen. Maybe there's not an amount of money you can pay to keep a guy from transferring to Duke or Kentucky, but it's still going to help you retain talent. So when you're a good recruiter, you're going to be able to get those guys in there, and maybe if it's easier to keep them, that will help as well. And obviously Dayton has done a good job with the transfer portal itself, bringing in guys. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. And in basketball, it's such a small sample of players, so one or two guys can make a huge difference on your roster. But I think if you're Dayton, you should I think this will be a good change overall for Dayton because I think there are more resources there for Dayton to take advantage of it than a lot of schools that they're competing with. And maybe that can help, because the way to get to the next level is just win. Keep winning, and that develops the reputation, that helps you with recruiting, and it brings in more money. So I think if you're a Dayton fan, it's got to be frustrating to lose a guy that you expect to come back. But I think you can make an overall positive out of it as well.
If we drink enough warped wing fly lights tonight, they could afford the next Deron Holmes next spring. That portion of these, every beer sold or drank, portion of the proceeds goes to Dayton athletes through the Dayton Six, the NIL collective run by Matt Farrell, has been on top of things really since the start in 2021. So I think Dayton's in a good position there. I had a long conversation with Dayton AD Neil Sullivan on Monday last week for a story that'll come out soon about these coming changes, the whole pay to play era, which is coming. Unlike VCU's AD, who put a number on the amount they expect to play players, $4 to $5 million. Neil didn't want to put an exact number on.
He's too good with the press.
He want to get too specific yet. He just knows it's going to be changing year by year. He did say it would be in the millions. Now, we didn't talk about who's getting those millions, but obviously the men's basketball players will be getting the largest share of the money because the men's basketball team is the revenue producing program for the university. But there are so many side effects to this whole era. How does paying players affect all the other programs? Because suddenly all the money that the Dayton basketball team is bringing to the university, most of that money is going to the players now instead of supporting the volleyball team or the soccer team. So they're going to have to find new streams of money and new ways of cutting costs with all those programs that don't produce revenue for the university, but are still very important to the university. I mean, the Dayton volleyball team is a powerhouse. UD is a volleyball school more than anything right now. The men's soccer team got to number 5 in the country last year. So all these programs are loved and very important to the university. They just don't make money for the university. And
those of us who are Ohio State fans too. Yeah. The football team didn't beat Michigan, but I believe UD soccer beat Michigan in the NCAA tournament.
True. Yeah, that's right.
There you go.
So we talked about that. We talked about coaches' salaries. I said, are you going to have to take money out of the pot that you pay coaches with to be able to afford these players? Because they have at least $3 million tied up in their three highest paid coaches: Anthony Grant, Carter Greer, James Kane. At least 2 years ago, the last time we could see a tax return from UD. Those guys, Anthony was making well north of $2 million. Ricardo was the second highest paid. But he said most likely you're going to see like a slower growth in those salaries. You're not
Gotcha.
Those guys aren't going to be getting a pay
Yeah,
cut.
you
or
have
anything
there
like
have been a few football coaches who obviously make
Yeah, sure.
exponentially more,
that.
and these were guys that were maybe not at the top of their. They were not at the. They didn't have the best leverage. But you have seen some football coaches already start to agree to new deals that give back some of that money, and I think you're going to have a cap on the growth of those salaries. Basketball, the salaries that haven't exploded the same way football have. So it'll be interesting. Maybe they'll just not that money will be cut off before it gets into the coaching salaries getting so high.
Yeah, fans. I think fans. A lot of them have had a hard time dealing with this new era. But for me, it was, they liked the amateur sport aspects
Right.
of college sports, which I understand.
But
it is
when
you're not rooting. You don't want to root for a pro. You don't want your Flyers to be a pro team.
Totally get it. When a university is making millions and millions and millions of dollars off 21-year-olds, they
Yeah.
deserve
Well, that's
peace.
what happened. I mean, when I was in college, the argument was still, well, they don't really make that much money, and it was true.
Mhm.
And now, I think Ohio State's revenue was like $25 million or something like that in like 2005, and now it's like 250.
250.
So it
yeah.
went up so much that argument went away.
Yeah.
So there is the money now.
Yeah.
And that is the same way in basketball, even though the money is not as much bigger as football, but football is still bringing in the money for all the other sports too. So it's really there to share the wealth more. And a lot of these college programs, especially, they waste a lot of their money on purpose. Because they can't spend it on the players, so they spend it on facilities that they don't need. They have a perfectly fine facility, they tear it down and build a $20 million facility. So I think overall, people will get used to that. Like I said, there's a little bit of an incremental change. I think the transfer portal is the thing that's more roiling for fans, especially because you want to have some continuity, which college basketball already had a bit of a problem with transfers, I think, and continuity before. So that almost the impact of the portal might be larger on college football because you're already over that threshold of what it was sort of disconcerting to see the how much player movement there was in college basketball. But again, there's pros and cons to it, because Dayton has brought in plenty of good transfers, and I would imagine, I haven't studied it real closely, but I feel like Dayton's probably a big net positive in the portal area in terms of they brought in more good players than guys who left that were really
last
good
year was
somewhere
the first
else.
year they lost players to the portal that they would have rather kept.
Yeah, this was the first year, and you kind of wondered how that would go. And hey, there's Kobe Brea starting for Kentucky,
he's
and
doing well.
there's Kobe Elvis starting for Oklahoma. And
Oklahoma's having a good
a
season.
week or two ago, they were still undefeated.
Yeah,
2 weeks ago. I think.
Yeah, my thinking is once the NCAA took $1 billion from CBS around 1990, a deal of which Dayton 80 Tom Frericks played a part in landing, it was no longer an amateur sport. It was only a matter of time before this would become a pro sport.
Well, I've read about when they started giving scholarships in like the 30s and 20s or whenever, off and on.
Hey, I thought I was the old guy here. Go ahead.
That was controversial then. I mean, to me, a scholarship is a form of compensation. I mean,
Yeah.
some people. But it was a big deal if you had somebody on scholarship in like 1900. You can read stories about how
Sure.
how disgraceful that was, and it was like a legit scholarship too. But it was still just no, that's just horrible.
Huh.
So and so those kinds of things. This is still more of an outgrowth of that from that standpoint.
Dayton fan Mark sent me a couple questions regarding all this. He said he asked, "What is the total dollar amount being paid to UD basketball players?" Which I don't know. No, that's a hard number to come across. Nobody really wants to put exact
the joy
numbers
of
on
covering
this.
private
It's not a pro
universities.
sport in that regard because in pro sports, all the dollars are pretty much out there in public. But maybe we'll get to that point in college sports.
Yeah.
That would be actually fun and exciting. 2, does any player have a written contract for services in excess of 2 years? And that is coming with this new era. There's going to be players with multi-year deals. There's going to be players on 1-year deals. There's going to be all sorts of it. Whether we know the contracts, I don't know. Probably not, at least in the case of UD. He asked how much Dayton's French freshman Amal Latang is making right now, which, again, I have no idea. He wouldn't give me his pay stub. And can UD sustain the payment of money to players in this new environment, which I think the answer is yes. I think they're well positioned to be able to compete, especially with like-minded programs in the A10. Will it be as easy to compete with the Dukes, the Ohio States? No, but they haven't really been competing with those teams for recruits anyway, so I don't think much changes there. But I think they'll be all right in this new era. They're certainly well prepared. Neil is a guy who's always been on top of stuff in this. And I think he really enjoys talking about this stuff when we talk about
Well,
this.
and there are still plenty of programs below Dayton that Dayton can call up. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, Dayton is not like they're not at the bottom. I mean, there's someone who could excel at a school that is not at the profile of Dayton. That coming to Dayton would be would increase their pay and increase their platform that much as well.
We have another question here from Tim, a UD fan. He says, while I very much prefer Anthony Grant's calm demeanor on the sideline as opposed to Archie's stomping and screaming, and you can throw Dan Hurley in that category too, wouldn't you like to see a little bit more of the firing of the team up when they fall behind? I see this a lot from fans who don't think Anthony is expressive enough on the sideline, and he definitely can get that way. He's definitely more laid back than a lot of coaches, but plenty of times where he is out of his mind on the sidelines. So I don't think that's a big issue. And whatever he's doing, they're doing a good job coming back from behind. They've erased a ton of big deficits.
I've seen people have to hold him back on the sideline.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, you've got a team full of 22 and 23-year-olds. Of their main leading 6 players, 5 of them are in their 4th or 5th year of college. That kind of leadership should be coming from your players.
Yeah. He's definitely not the type to yell at players. I've not seen that. Go have a very intense conversation with them all the time during games. I see that a lot, but he's not the Bob Huggins type who's going to yank a guy and then get in his ear on the bench.
Right.
But maybe that's needed at times. I don't know. It's just not his style. But I understand the fans' viewpoint on that one. We have another question. Why can't we recruit a consistent three-point shooter? Well, this team doesn't have that right now. They're definitely struggling, as Jeremy listed the three-point shooting percentages earlier. But they can recruit them. They had Kobe Brea last year, who was the nation's best three-point shooter. And that was the best three-point shooting Dayton team in a long time, mostly because of him. But plenty of other guys. Nate Santos was above 40% last year.
Duran shot well.
Duran shot well and didn't shoot a lot of them. But, until the last 6 games, it was one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country. So you just hope the percentages come back to the average, I guess. But
and honestly, there aren't that many guys who come out of high school, oh, he was a great shooter in high school, and are immediately and all through college great shooters.
Yeah.
Often it's the guy you didn't expect who goes in the gym and shoots 1,000 shots a day, and all of a sudden, wow, he's shooting 44%, isn't he?
Despite Cheeks' struggles, he's actually shooting the exact same percentage he shot 2 years ago at Robert Morris. He was the last time. That was the last time he shot a lot of threes. He's about at 35%. So that shows you how well he was shooting early in the season. That he's still there after his recent struggles. But they've got some guys struggling. Nate Santos though is still at 40% on the season. So you can't argue with that. Problem with the shooting is some days you're going to make 6 out of 6, as Nate Santos did, and the next
that was
day
Lehigh.
Well, still hard to make 6 out of 6.
It is.
I made about 4 out of 13 on Friday, which is pretty good for me. Today, I don't know what I shot. I lost track. It's hard to keep track.
Gotcha.
Malachi is shooting pretty good from 3. He's at 30. He's also at 41%, but he doesn't shoot a lot of threes. And Javon Bennett at 37%. Problem with those guys is they haven't shot the ball well in the last 6 games.
Right.
So, but on the season, they're doing okay. So
let's have that slump in, huh?
Yeah, I mean
that's not good. Sometimes it's better to have your slump in January than last week of February.
Good point.
Yep.
Good point.
What do you guys think about the expansion of the NCAA tournament? Because it is coming.
I think Marcus
and
I
don't know what it's going to be like, but what do you think?
You got to be practical here. You have to understand it's going to happen. So what's the best case scenario?
I think it's going to be like.
I think if they just add
maybe.
like another first 4, I can live with that.
Yeah.
I think a Dayton first 4 and like a Western first 4.
Ooh.
I think could make a lot of sense. There's a lot to go in this topic. I think a lot of people just go the first 4. That's stupid. That's a dumb idea. Like in a lot of national reporters, but if you go to it, it's pretty cool. It's a weird concept, but it works in practice. I think. And if you don't like it, well, just don't watch it. I don't just pick up the tournament on Thursday. You're not really losing anything, right? But it's cool if you're there. It's worth watching on TV most of the time. I don't like that you can win your conference and still have to play in it. But there's even some, those teams get a unit for winning a game. And some, we've talked about covering these things. Some of the smaller schools say, hey, we like this showcase. We're happy. We don't care. We're fine. Yeah. And some of the mids, even the power conference teams say, hey, we're playing. Hey, they do a great job putting it on, and maybe the coaches are just saying the right thing, but more power to them. You know what I mean? I think the first four is cool. And again, it's not going to stay where it is. It's not going to get too big. It would be a disaster.
Be careful. Be careful saying it's not going to stay where it is. We want it here.
Well, no. Yeah, true,
I don't think there's any danger, especially if they expand, of UD losing the first four.
You mean number of teams?
If the expansion is that all they do is add another first four, I think UD will be one of them.
Hopefully they keep the tradition of Dayton having the very first game, sort of like the Reds used to have the very first game in baseball.
I like.
Remember
that's
that?
fun.
So, but I think it's not going to be like where they're going to go to 96 because
that's too much.
Well, TV doesn't want it. That's the main saving grace. If the TV people said, "Oh yeah, we'll buy it," that's the reason there's a first four and not a 96 10 years ago or whatever. Because TV's like, nah, we don't want that many more games because they would not make money off of it. So I think what you're going to have happen is probably another 8. I think if they do that, where again, I think it would make sense to do one in like the West Coast to maybe ease travel. That's fine. I mean, I can live with that. Both from a Dayton standpoint, because I like it being in Dayton, and from an overall standpoint, that doesn't mess things up too bad. And I do think, I mean, I don't care about all these power conference. I think there should be a rule that if you are under 500 in your conference, unless you win the tournament, you should not be in. There should be no.
I don't know, man. You looking at the SEC this year?
I don't care.
That's true. They're going to use that.
Too bad. It's not my fault that they have that many teams.
Yeah.
I didn't decide to do the conference that way.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to hear it, but. There are a couple of 2 or 3 teams that have a legitimate gripe that get left out, and it'd be nice to get those teams in.
There'll still be 2 or 3 teams after them who have a gripe.
Their gripe will be a lot worse, though. Especially, I mean, none of the power conference teams will have a legit gripe, but you have like an Indiana State or teams like that. I would like if that team gets in every year now. That's good. I mean, Dayton. How many times was Dayton in team number 70 or 74?
A couple times. A couple years ago, they were.
2 or 3 years ago, my wife took a picture of me laying on the floor like a dead body when they announced right after they said, "Oh, and by the way, the first team out was Dayton," and we thought they were like the 6th team out or something. And I heard that, and I did collapse on the floor.
Everybody was already miserable. They just got a little bit more miserable.
Yeah.
It would be better if they had never released that information.
So Marcus and I have disagreed in the past about the expansion of the college football playoffs, which I'm for, and I think you're not so much for.
I just wanted 8.
Yeah, right. I am in favor of any kind of tournament expansion that means more good teams are playing each other, especially when it means teams from non-power conferences are playing teams from power conferences on neutral floors. I love it.
Beth and Todd.
Right. That's the problem is they'll do it in like the dumbest way possible. But if they don't, and again, they don't just dump all the more small conference teams into this extra game, which would not be a positive. But I would like to see more of and I've always said that they should have more. It makes more sense to have Arizona or UCLA or whoever in the first 4 because there's going to be better ratings too.
Yeah.
Like, there's more fans that are going to watch them.
Arizona or UCLA disagrees, but yes, I love it.
but I mean, I think so just from a practical standpoint, if you're a TV executive, it's actually a better TV product.
And they are our overlords pretty much.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
We have a question from Beth and Ted Davis. What will be the most difficult game to win for the Flyers going forward? It's definitely VCU, the last game of the regular season, because that game is on the road. 36% chance of winning, according to KenPom.com.
What does KenPom say for the at St. Bonaventure game?
That one is 46% chance.
Okay.
They've actually played well at VCU over the years. They've got surprisingly some wins there, but losses at home to VCU for like 2 or 3 years. The other team was winning on the other team's court for whatever reason, going the opposite way of what you expect. But, St. Bonaventure is a tough place to play. But Dayton's played well there over the years, too. Rhode Island will be a tough one. See how good Archie's team is come late February. Really, all these. St. Louis is playing better, so there is going to be tough. That's coming up here in a couple weeks.
And, hey, if you're a Flyers fan right now and you're depressed at how the last couple games have gone, Duquesne started the season 0-6. 0-6. I mean, that doesn't
After
happen
winning the A-10 tournament last year.
right. And they are what now? Are they
2-1 in the A-10?
7-9, so they've gone 7-3 since. So
speaking of miserable fan bases, who is the most miserable in Ohio right now? We've got Cincinnati, winless in the Big 12. Xavier not doing much in the Big East. Ohio State hanging by a thread. Just had a disappointing loss at home to Oregon.
No, they don't care though.
Did not do anything. They to beat Kentucky, but other than that, they've been all over the place this season. And Dayton, after these 2 losses, their fans are ready to jump off the cliff.
You can immediately rule out Ohio State basketball fans because it's.
You mean they don't even know they're miserable?
Right,
first.
exactly.
Oh,
Apathy set in a long time ago.
Plus, they have a football team to distract.
Right, and the football. That's
exactly.
obviously that puts it over the top.
Yeah.
That they haven't even needed to worry about it for the last few weeks. But
Yes.
apathy is kind of set in there, so you can rule them out. I would probably say it's got to be Cincinnati because
so.
They would have. I don't know what Xavier's expectations were, and I know Cincinnati, not like they were going to win the Big 12, but they'd expect to be competitive. And they got a good win against Dayton. I mean, they've shown some good things. So it's, if you're 0-4 is pretty bad. It's got to be Cincinnati, right?
Unfortunately, that's their best win, and it's not as good as a win as it was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Cincinnati has gone the opposite way of Ohio State football. They finally beat their rival, and now their season is falling apart. Whereas Ohio State football
Who won
lost
the
to their
cross-country
rival.
shootout? I don't remember. Was it Xavier?
No, Cincinnati beat Xavier.
won it.
Yeah,
Okay.
finally. It's happened like once in 100 years. I exaggerate, but I'm allowed to do that. I was a Bearcat fan growing up.
Yeah, right.
So I'm allowed to talk bad about the Bearcats. But they're 0-4.
Well, and this is
in
a
the Big
Dayton
12.
show, so we're allowed to talk bad about Xavier anytime we want. But
Yeah, Xavier does not have a football team to distract them from their current struggles. They are 2-4 in the biggest. They did just beat DePaul. Got to give them credit for that. At DePaul.
They don't even have a good
that's
coach.
That's got to be tougher winning. It's
nice.
got to be tougher winning at
Nice.
DePaul than winning at
Nice.
GW. But I don't know.
My kid who lives in Chicago sees Holtman at the little chicken stand on the side of the road all the time. So he's enjoying Chicago.
Holtman was a very nice guy, and he hit the ground running and did a good job. And his resume was great. It was funny because he and Archie kind of had similar paths, and Holtman had the good start, and Archie's was bad at Indiana, and then Holtman it just hadn't worked out. It didn't work out at the end. So it's interesting to see all that because and Holtman's teams when he got to Ohio State, they had all finished like higher than they were supposed to finish in their conference, like for 4 or 5 years in a row, and just hasn't worked out for him there. But and I know DePaul is like historically kind of a underachieving program now. Right?
You are
say the
so
least.
kind. You are so kind.
That's putting it kindly. Yeah, they haven't done anything in quite a long time, but they do have a great history.
Hey, the UD fans who want to be in the Big East point at DePaul, but do we really need to be in the Big East? Look, we just beat their only 2 ranked teams.
I'm glad
right?
you brought up the Big East. Fans do not get tired of that conversation.
No.
I get tired of it.
I bet you do.
Neil, he tried to log into the website a couple weeks ago to apply to the Big East again, but he got locked out. He couldn't remember his password. So it's still on hold. There's who can remember their passwords these days?
Yeah, right.
So
right.
It's an issue every year. No, it's not like Dayton has a choice. Like, the Big East hasn't sent them an invitation. It's not like there's not anything they can do other than try to make their best of the A10 and maybe actually win an A10
That would be nice.
championship more than once every.
Can we
7
put
or
that
8
on the
years.
calendar? Can we schedule that?
Yeah. It's not a good look when Dayton fans complain about the A10 and then go out and lose 2 on the road. They're getting called out for it on Twitter right now, deservedly so, because they're not too good for the A10. They do have more resources. They've got more fans. They put every other fan base to shame when it comes to attendance. But on the basketball court, VCU's had a better run over the last 15 to 20 years than Dayton, and has beaten Dayton more often than not on the court. So you can't really point to any other team other than VCU as the best team in the conference right now.
Are you trying to start a fight with me or what?
I'm just trying to point out the facts. But in the last 3 or 4 years, though, Dayton's
there
a
you
little
go.
closer because VCU, who had the last Sweet 16 berth in the A10?
Hey, come
It was
on.
Dayton, 2014. Who had the last
Wow.
NCAA tournament?
Wow.
It was Dayton and Duquesne.
2014 is the last Sweet 16 for the A10.
Yeah, last 8 and Elite 8, of course, too.
Oy.
So in a couple categories, Dayton is above VCU, but head to head, it's VCU.
So what's our next topic? Let's move on
let's
from
move
that.
on. We don't want to talk about the Big East. How about the Crossroads Classic? Dayton, Ohio State, Cincinnati,
another
and
thing
Xavier.
that-
Are we ever going to see it?
TV ruins everything because TV would have to make it. And from what I actually did a story on this a few years ago, I think you were busy for a week when it happened to bubble up. So I talked to Neil and I talked to Gene Smith, and Gene's take was, well, that was actually more about if they would play each other more regularly, and they both said they were into it. There's a lot of boring details about why they didn't play more home and homes, and it goes both ways. I would still rather that they did.
Yeah.
But the Crossroads Classic thing is an idea that's like everybody thinks this is a good idea. Why can't they do it? And Gene's answer was basically, well, no TV network would give us enough money to make us do it.
Right.
And then there are some scheduling issues because, again, this is the Big Ten stupidly plays a 20-game schedule. So that reduces the number of games that they have, that Ohio State has available. And UD, though, needs to have its bye games also. So UD doesn't have an unlimited number of games to schedule there. Not that UD wouldn't do it, but it's not like snapping your fingers either.
Right.
But, the financial aspect made it kind of difficult. In terms of just how kind of complicated scheduling gets with this kind of thing. Now, would it be very popular? Yeah, absolutely. I've had somebody like in my, one of my old colleagues said, they could do like a 16-team Ohio tournament every year.
Man, I had a 64-team bracket. Go ahead, continue.
Right.
Let's not get crazy.
And it would be great. It would be a lot of fun. Unfortunately, the way the schedule, the college basketball, everything about the schedule in college basketball is stupid as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. You're not looking for that Cedarville Worcester second round game?
Well, hey, no. Cedarville beat Wright State one year, and I think it was like the same year Wright State almost beat Michigan State or something like that.
Yeah.
So but it's that would be maybe I don't know if we should include the Division II teams, but even just the Division I teams, that would be a lot of fun. But unfortunately, there's too many games nobody wants to watch that have to be on the schedule instead.
We have a couple more questions here from fans who are here at Warped Wing Spring Brew, drinking some Fly Light lagers with us. Why the slow start? Yeah, Dayton has been pretty bad for the most part at the beginning of the games. They had a pretty good start against UMass. We're up 10, had a chance to push it to 13 twice. Chiefs missed 2 3-pointers that were pretty open where they could have really taken control of that game. So, overall, they definitely have had troubles at the beginning of the games. I don't know the answer to how they can play better. I know fans have theorized about changing the starting lineup. I don't really think would affect anything, and I don't really know if they have that option now. It looks Posh Alexander got hurt in the last game. I saw him leaving the UMass game in a boot and on crutches. Obviously hurt his ankle a little bit. Don't know what his status is for tomorrow, but he might be out for a little while. Who knows? Find out tomorrow when I get to the game. But
you almost wonder if there would come a time when, and I'm sure they talk about this in football, you script the first drive. Does Anthony's coaching staff script the first 4 possessions?
That's a good question. They do seem to always try to get it to Zed Key on the first possession. So
I'm all in favor of inside-out basketball.
Yeah. I don't know. I think if I had an answer, then Anthony Grant had it too. So I'm not sure what the answer is. Another question here: What are some of your favorite behind-the-scenes moments? I mentioned all the waiting I have to do outside the locker room.
Is it Archdeacon typing one-fingered?
Archdeacon typing one-fingered. Yeah, anytime I'm sitting next to Arch working on a story. Definitely after they beat Nevada in the NCAA tournament last year, that 17-point comeback, I had to run back to the media room to type my story real fast before going to the locker room. We have open locker rooms in the NCAA tournament, which is a blessing. And I looked at Arch. I was like, wow, Arch, we got something to write about here. And it was like, you just appreciated the moment. You knew how amazing that game was, how amazing the storyline was. Dayton finally won an NCAA tournament game after 9-year drought, 7 years not even being in the tournament. So you know what it meant to all the fans, knew what it meant to Coach Grant and the players, and to be able to write about it was a treat. So, I think anytime there's a great game like that, like the Marquette game or the UConn game, and when I was in Maui, talking to Posh Alexander and Malachi Smith outside the bus, outside the Lahaina Civic Center in Maui, in the dark, even though it was like 1 o'clock back in Ohio. Moments like that are things that stand out for me.
See, my moments were worse when I was, Flyer News covering UD at 4-26. Our bad stories were, hey, why did that guy who sits the bench for the team beat us to the party in the ghetto after, after the game? So,
You should be covering the Flyers now for having to sit through that. That's why I always say you got to sit through a lot of crap to get to the good stuff. Like the Bengals writers.
Yeah.
Finally got to go to the Super Bowl a few years ago.
Yeah.
Ohio State writers, they struggled through that season a year ago, and they only won, I don't know, 12. How many games they win last year? Just 10?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, 10 and 2 last
year.
Hard
times.
10 and 3.
10 and 3.
10 and 2.
Yeah.
Well, I did cover the 6 and 7 team in
see? That's what I'm
2011.
saying.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you know,
You
it's
deserve to go
been-
to Atlanta next week.
Yeah,
later this
yeah.
week.
But I mean, I was at one point. I think I was 14-1 covering Michigan games. So
Wow.
now it's 14-5. And so you know, you never know. Things kind of even. And the one they lost, they were going to hire Urban Meyer as the coach the next day, so nobody really cared. So you know, it's sometimes things can turn around.
That's why I covered so many Reds games for so many years. Like, oh, well, one day I'll get to cover the World Series. So it's like 200, 300 games.
Yeah.
I don't cover them much at all anymore. But so I never got my payday.
Hey, I am on record. This is the Reds are going to do it this year. I mean,
Oh,
not
wow,
not
that
win the
would-
World Series. I think they'll win the division this year.
Oh my gosh. Big time prediction.
It's the everybody's going to say Francona is the greatest manager of all time, and what's going to happen is they just won't have 7 guys hurt all year. I would love to, you know. Sometimes you think managers and coaches look at a job and like, ooh, that's a good time to grab that job. You know, if they're just half healthy, they're
That's
going
what
to
I'm
be a better
saying.
team.
100 win Reds this year because they
Whoa,
got rid of a
Come on
manager
now.
that cost them 10 wins, and they brought in a manager who's worth 10. So that's 20. That's like gets you to like 95, right?
Right.
So
Francona
yeah, but- and
already
you
is
have,
one of the great managers.
you have
so.
a little bit of
We-
injury luck. It's right there. It's right there.
we're clearly losing our minds late.
Oh
in
my
the-
gosh.
I only had
we
one
were
of
talking
those.
too long, I guess. Yeah. Any other great hot takes
That's
before
my
we
hottest take.
close this show?
That's a hot take.
I'm going to say the Bengals make the playoffs next year. How about that?
Yeah, they should. I
That's a
mean,
great
their
prediction.
schedule is very weak
Right?
next year
Yeah,
too.
that's why
Yeah.
they lost
Again.
so many games this year. To get
So-
that weak
yeah.
schedule next year.
Right.
Yeah.
Even with the third place schedule next year, it's still pretty weak. I look at it. There's like 7 or 8 sure wins as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know if I want to make any predictions about the Flyers. It's too hard to predict
Yeah.
what's going to happen. But that's the beauty of sports.
Can they build that confidence back? Can they find a way? They got back-to-back home games. Win your home games. Get the flow back. I don't know. I hope so.
Typically, you wouldn't want a week break this early in the conference play, but I think it came at a good time for
Yeah,
this team.
absolutely.
I mean, they need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what they can do. And somebody asked us about Isaac Jack, why he's not playing, and I don't think it's a case of just playing other guys more. I mean, I'm sure they may try some of that, but I think the guys they got in there just have to start performing better.
Yeah.
So that would. Anthony always says the game's a lot easier when you make shots, and eventually that's what's going to get the Flyers back on track is making some 3-pointers.
Yep.
And I don't expect them to shoot under 30% the rest of the season.
It's
So,
funny. We do talk about, what if they play more inside out? What if we do the ball's just got to go in the hoop? There's a old coach who said there are only 2 great plays, South Pacific and put the ball in the basket.
Yeah.
But they need to put the ball in the
Yeah,
basket.
and just make more winning plays. I mean, they just did some things the other night at UMass that they weren't doing early this season. Untimely turnovers. Zedke had 3 goaltending
Yeah.
calls in one game, which I
Yeah.
don't think I'd ever seen.
Yeah, that was
He
crazy.
is excitable sometimes.
He is, yeah.
I love it. I
It's
love it.
just, stuff like that came back to bite them a little bit, and that was why they lost. And defensively, they haven't been as good as they were earlier. UMass didn't have any
Right.
trouble with their press, which has won
If
a few
there's
games.
anything that encouraged me about this team going forward, it is that we have 4 guards who can play defense. And college basketball is a guard game. If we focus on the defensive side and they are pressuring the hell out of the other team, that gives me confidence.
Yeah. Rebounding was the other issue at UMass.
That
They
is a
could not
problem.
get any boards on the defensive end, and UMass was getting all sorts of second chances
Yes.
that killed them. So that has been an issue in the past, and they know it. But
But hey,
It's
that should
easier.
be an effort type of a thing, right?
I mean, you'd think,
you
but-
Coach
should
'em
be
up.
able to get better at rebounding.
but it's hard to play hard. It's hard to play hard all the time. I'm not saying they're not playing hard. I don't see that at all. But I do think the shot making is the biggest issue, and it's affecting them in all sorts of different ways.
So how is this year, and I know we're wrapping up here soon, but how is this year's team, given all the turnover, similar to or different from the last couple of years with Duran? Obviously, Duran's a big difference, but what stands out to you as same or different?
Duran, it's just he's the biggest thing they've had to replace in a long time. Even Obi Toppin maybe wasn't as central to the offense as Duran Holmes was.
Sure.
So they've done better than I thought, actually, replacing
Yeah.
him, because he was, I guess, a twice-in-a-generation player. And I think everybody's waiting to see what Hill can do at the next level
All
next
right.
year once he's better. But we've got to wrap up here. It's
Thanks
been
to
great.
Warped Wing.
Thanks to Warp Wing for having us. I will be back for sure to have more fly lights. I'll probably take some home with me too. Why not? But hopefully we'll do more of these. It was a lot of fun talking to you guys. And,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Drinking beer, talking sports. This is why we got into the business.
That's right. We'll keep an eye out for our stuff from Atlanta starting
Yes.
going down on Friday.
Go
we'll
Bucks.
have some things on social media. So
Yep.
like and share and help us out there too.
Thanks.